Good afternoon. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and our Douglas and Sarah Allison Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those who join us on all of these occasions on our heritage.org website. Would ask that everyone here in-house make sure that your cell phones have been turned off as we prepare to begin. And, of course, our internet viewers are always welcome to send questions or comments at any time, simply emailing us at speaker@heritage.org. And we will, of course, post the program on our Heritage homepage for your future reference. Hosting our special discussion today and serving as moderator is Ben Domenech of our good friends at the Federalist, where he serves as publisher. Please join me in welcoming Ben. Ben?
I want to thank you all for coming today. I think we're going to have a very interesting discussion. And I'd like to start by introducing the panelists that David Azerrad has brought together here. David is the director of the Heritage Foundation's Kenneth Simon Center for Principles in Politics, where he teaches the tenets of the American political tradition to policymakers, political leaders, and the public at large. He's a popular speaker on the American founding and is a doctoral candidate at the University of Dallas, where his dissertation is on John Locke. Bill Voegeli, who's next to him, is the senior editor of the Claremont Review of Books, a visiting scholar at Claremont McKenna College's Henry Salvatori Center, and the author of two books, Never Enough, America's Limitless Welfare State, and The Pity Party, a mean-spirited diatribe against liberal compassion, which is coming out in November, and I recommend it to all of you. It's really excellent. He has a doctorate in political science from Loyola University in Chicago. And to his left is Kevin Williamson, the roving correspondent for National Review. He is the author of multiple books, most recently, The End is Near and It's Going to Be Awesome, How Going Broke Will Leave America Richer, Happier, and More Secure. I also recommend that to you if you've not read it. He is a widely published journalist and has served as editor-in-chief for 3 newspapers and also serves as the theater critic at the New Criterion. So I'd like to say just a few quick words about our subject today and then turn things over to David so that we can start this, and we'll go through and each panelist will give a few of their thoughts and then we'll open it up for your questions. I think that the subject matter that we're discussing today, where is liberalism going, is a very interesting question for a number of reasons. I think that the essence of progressivism, as we've understood it over the course of the past century, has been this ever adapting system that serves effectively as a protection racket for all of the various interested parties, factions, and groups that it seeks to insulate either from the forces of the marketplace or from consequences external to government. We've seen this play out in a number of different areas. We've seen it in law, in education, in the regulatory state. And with the expansion of the administrative state over the course of this century, we've seen this become something that's harder and harder to defend on the fiscal merits of it, and has created some real clashes within the traditional sort of liberal factions. I'm curious, frankly, to hear from our panelists today about what they think about this clash, about where things are going. But in particular, I'm curious to hear what they have to say about the issue of culture war. We're seeing in the context of this election the issues of culture war, the war on women, issues of race and homophobia. All of these hot-button issues become more and more at the center of what the left's argument really is for their electoral success. And I think that this is something that really is a question of whether that's going to reach a point of diminishing returns. Is that going to be something that we're going to see sustained? What does it look 10 years like from now in terms of the culture war? Can these battles be sustained? And I think that that's something that really is an open question before us. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to David to hear his comments on this. Where is liberalism going?
Thank you, Ben. Welcome, everyone. So where is liberalism going? Where will it be 25 years from now? These are big questions that one should approach cautiously. As one of my favorite American philosophers once said, Yogi Berra, I hate making predictions, especially about the future. A lot can happen in 25 years, including many dangerous things that would make the concerns of modern liberalism appear frivolous. Modern liberalism, you see, is just not capable of dealing decisively with issues requiring violence, crime and terrorism at home, and war abroad. Should the world continue to become a more dangerous place, should the homeland be threatened, Or should we witness a return to 1970s levels of violent crime? I think that would put a considerable damper on the prospects of liberalism. There is a sense in which contemporary liberalism is the luxury of a bored, prosperous, and safe people who, as Locke might say, have forgotten about the harshness and unprovidedness of the natural human condition. You wouldn't need a war or a complete economic collapse, just a general sense of danger to have people lose interest in large swaths of the modern liberal agenda, including the issues you mentioned, Ben. I think we should also remember that the fortunes of liberalism are in no small way tied to the fortunes of conservatism. The failures of liberalism at home and abroad need not hurt the liberal cause. If people continue to fear the alternative, if they remain convinced that conservatism is a reactionary, outdated philosophy with little to offer them, as it only speaks to the interests of the 1% and the other villains in Elizabeth Warren's speech. While I think it would be unfair to say that American conservatives, like Yasser Arafat, never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity, we're not always sufficiently bold in going on the offensive and making a compelling case for what an America governed according to conservative principles would look like and how it would make life better for ordinary Americans who care not one hoot about the 10th Amendment or footnote 4 of Caroline Products. So heeding Yogi Berra's wise words, I'm not going to make any bold predictions about the future of liberalism. I do, however, feel more confident trying to discuss where it's going, or to be more precise, where it wants to go. There's an internal logic to modern liberalism that can be discerned. And I think one of the first people to begin to discern it is Aldous Huxley in his novel, A Brave New World. Now, Huxley doesn't get everything right. In fact, he gets a few important things very wrong. But his dystopian world provides a good starting point for analyzing the inner logic of liberalism. The Brave New World was published in 1932 and then reissued in 1946 with a preface written by the author in his own name, in which Huxley says, "As political and economic freedom diminishes, sexual freedom tends compensatingly to increase, and the dictator will do well to encourage that freedom. In conjunction with the freedom to daydream under the influence of dope and movies and the radio, it will help to reconcile his subjects to the servitude which is their fate." End quote. What a luminous description of the inner logic of liberalism. Give up your economic freedom, give up your political freedom, you will be rewarded with license. By Ford, as the Brave New Worlders might say, does liberalism deliver in this regard? To quote the title of one of my favorite Dalrymple essays, it's all sex all the time. It's not just the sex itself, it's the permission to indulge. No judgment except against those who judge. So long as it's safe and consensual, everything goes. In this regard, though, couldn't we ask, with Herbert Marcuse, whether our perversity is sufficiently polymorphous? Unpleasant as it may be to consider the possibility, I fear that the next great frontier for the left will be trying to lower the age of consent. But ultimately, as Huxley correctly recognizes, sexual freedom is only going to take you so far. You need entertainment to reconcile us to our servitude. Now, strictly speaking, this isn't a liberal issue, but rather points to a set of technological conditions that play into liberals' hands. Huxley mentioned dope, movies, and the radio. How quaint. We have 400 channels on the television, movies on demand, the internet, and year-round sports. iPhones, iPads, and soon Google Glasses to keep us perennially distracted. Oh, and video games with multiple online gaming. And they still haven't invented Soma. Soma, Huxley wrote, has, quote, all the advantages of Christianity and alcohol with none of their defects, end quote. All the drugs we have today are bad for us. And as much as liberals love to have fun, they like their health even more. In this regard, I think there's going to be some pushback against the efforts to liberalize and legalize marijuana, as studies are going to show that it's really bad for you, and I think it may go the way of cigarettes. Think for a second, though, what will happen to our regime when they invent Soma, inexpensive, harmless ecstasy in a pill. What will then be left of what Madison called the vigilant and manly spirit which actuates the people of America, a spirit which nourishes freedom and in return is nourished by it. To scale back the growth of statism, to defend our regime of ordered liberty, to push back against the liberal agenda, you need engaged citizens. The conservative vision is threatened, therefore, not only by the powerful forces of liberalism that eat away at the fabric of civil society and sap the Republican spirit of self-government, but also by the seemingly apolitical technological developments that keep us apart from one another, allow us to lose ourselves in our own solipsistic bubbles, and to further offload to the state our collective responsibilities. This, in a nutshell, is Tocqueville's warning about democratic despotism at the end of democracy in America. Seen in this light, it pains me to say that the future of liberalism looks promising. Liberalism has the wind in its sails. The administrative state grows larger every day. We need to turn the ship around, and that requires a spirited citizenry, which both the hedonism of liberalism and of our popular culture conspire against. Now, ultimately, of course, modern liberalism has much grander ambitions than merely growing the size of the state while allowing us to have some fun. Its political project is to make life fair, to ensure that each and every one of us, regardless of the accidents of our birth, has the same odds of success in the race of life. No less an authority than President Barack Obama said in his second inaugural, I quote, "We are true to our creed when a little girl born into the bleakest poverty," his words, not mine, "knows that she has the same chance to succeed as anybody else because she's an American, she is free, and she is equal, not just in the eyes of God, but also in our own." And what is the greatest engine of unequal opportunity in life? That no amount of early Head Start, Pell Grants, and higher minimum wages can ever remedy. The family, of course. From our parents, we receive both our nature and nurture. The left knows this. As they like to say, if you want to succeed in America, pick your parents well. Or as Rawls put it, no one deserves his greater natural capacity nor merits a more favorable starting place in society. There is nothing fair about the fact that some are born to Barack and Michelle Obama, and others to single mothers in the Appalachian Mountains. Huxley's solution in A Brave New World is quite radical, but is at least consistent with the principles of justice as fairness. You abolish the genetic lottery through genetic engineering, and you abolish the family, well, by getting rid of the family. Now, I'm not suggesting that modern liberalism is pushing for either, only that the principles that they embrace point in that direction. To put it simply, the autonomy of the family has become a problem for liberals, a fact which they readily acknowledge. Since the 1980s at least, as far back as I know, it may have started earlier, they've identified the family as the stumbling block for their egalitarian agenda. Now, as I said, I don't think we should expect any attempts to eliminate the family coming from the left, but we should expect them to continue intensifying their demands to curtail the extra unearned opportunities that doting parents provide to their children. Let me give you two examples. The hapless French president, François Hollande, a couple years ago at a speech at the Sorbonne, in earnestness suggested abolishing homework, because it's not fair that certain children go home and have parents who can help them with their homework. Right here in America, Matthew Iglesias said that we should get rid of summer vacations, because it is not fair that certain children get to go away on enriching summer vacations with their parents, while others are stuck in inner cities doing nothing. I'd like to end on an encouraging note. In the 20th century, Huxley's diagnosis, I think, was largely correct. Economic and political freedom receded. Religious liberty, however, emerged almost unscathed from a century of statism in America. This has now changed. Religious liberty is clearly in the crosshairs of modern liberalism. And in trying to curtail it, liberalism may be picking a fight with opponents who will push back much harder than expected, and may end up firmly arresting the advances of the liberal Leviathan in one important area at least. Thank you.
Bill.
Good day. Those of you hoping for a vigorous fistfight kind of panel will have to put all your chips on Mr. Williamson. David and I will turn out to be in heated agreement about these questions.
Actually, I just went and saw my Soma dealer this morning, so I'm not really
We're sunk. So where is liberalism going? That question depends on two others. First, where do liberals want to go? Second, what challenges will they encounter in trying to get there? And how will they respond to those difficulties? In these brief remarks, I'll concentrate on the first and slightly less vast of these questions, with a push out of the starting gate from the pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus, who maintained that character is destiny. The most characteristic attribute of any political disposition is its understanding of human nature. The United States Constitution, for example, rests on a view of human nature explicated by James Madison in the 51st Federalist paper. Ambition must be made to counteract ambition, he wrote, through a policy of supplying by opposite and rival interests the defect of better motives. The necessity of such a policy was an unflattering reflection on human nature, Madison allowed, but government itself is the greatest of all reflections on human nature. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place oblige it to control itself. The defining characteristic of the modern liberalism developed in theory and practice over the past century is its aversion to this view of human nature. What we need, in the liberal view, is not a policy of supplying the defect of better motives. What we really need are better motives. And we'll never get them by counteracting ambition with ambition, but only by curtailing, renouncing, and transcending ambition. Madison's premise in the liberal view is a self-fulfilling prophecy. By relying on opposite and rival interests, he legitimates and perpetuates the pursuit of such interests, preventing the emergence of disinterested, selfless motives. As President Franklin Roosevelt said in 1935, people have learned that they can carry their burdens effectively only by cooperation. He called for the collaboration of all of us to provide, at the least, security for all of us. That collaboration, FDR continued, rested on the understanding that freedom and opportunity do not mean a license to climb upwards by pushing other people down. 27 years later, the Port Huron Statement, the founding document of the Students for a Democratic Society, took a similar stance. We regard men as infinitely precious and possessed of unfulfilled capacities for reason, freedom, and love. Men have unrealized potential for self-cultivation, self-direction, self-understanding, and creativity. It is this potential that we regard as crucial and to which we appeal, not to the human potentiality for violence, unreason, and submission to authority. The goal of man and society should be human independence, but, the statement was quick to say, that is not the same thing as what it called egoistic individualism. The object is not to have one's own way, so much as it is to have a way that is one's own. And as we realize better motives, Madison's great difficulty will steadily diminish. Government will not so much control the governed, whose intentions are decreasingly competitive and increasingly cooperative, as it will encourage, guide, and nurture them. At the same time, a government pursuing such benign intentions will be steadily less obliged to control itself. Madison's checks and balances can be discarded in favor of the talent, professionalism, and sense of mission that will pervade, direct, and restrain modern government. Government now demands the best trained brains of every business and profession, Roosevelt said. Thus, we must be loyal not merely to persons or parties, that is, to the sort of opposite and rival interests that defined politics during the receding era of competition, but we must be loyal also to the higher conceptions of ability and devotion that modern government requires. Liberals' willingness to rely on better motives is, to conservatives, wishful or even utopian. Liberals, however, think their hopefulness is more realistic about human nature than conservatives' skepticism. As the late political scientist Joseph Cropsey wrote in an essay almost 50 years ago, liberals believe human nature prepares us to live uncoerced in society. Liberalism, he wrote, envisions the simultaneous cultivation of men's idiosyncratic freedom and their coalescence into social community united by their natural brotherhood under the skin. In that state, men's perfect integration into community would be indistinguishable from their perfect freedom to do as they please. The selfish, untrustworthy qualities Madison attributes to human nature are ones liberals, following Rousseau, ascribe to the damage inflicted on our natures, which are harmless and guileless, by the mismanaged journey from the state of nature to civil society. The goal, in liberals' view, is not to make the best of the deformations of humans' innate goodness, in the mistaken belief that those deformations are truly natural and unalterable. It is instead to orient political and social life toward allowing our natural goodness, latent but not irretrievably lost, to flourish. We may say then that liberalism wants to go where it has always wanted to go. 1, toward a society where people's nice, creative natures are encouraged by therapeutic means, if necessary, to manifest themselves. In 2, a world that grows steadily more enlightened about and committed to the belief that, in Cropsey's words, among nations there are no genuine issues, but only attitudes or states of mind. As a result of this disposition, liberal applies, quoting Cropsey again, to domestic as well as to foreign affairs, the dictum that trust edifies and absolute trust edifies absolutely. This desire helps to explain the apparent contradiction between, on the one hand, liberals' moral relativism, manifested in demands to be tolerant rather than judgmental about all lifestyle choices, and on the other, their censoriousness, manifested in political correctness that anathematizes expressions deemed harmful or hateful. Liberalism, Cropsey wrote, demands the free expression of all powers unbound by conventions and unjudged by the confining criteria of truth or accomplishment. Because liberals believe that it is healthier to be oneself than to be right, perhaps because being right has no meaning beyond being oneself. The philosophy professor John Rawls, whom David mentioned, codified this impulse in his famous treatise, A Theory of Justice, published in 1971. Rawls argued that a just, fair society was obligated to do everything in its power to assist a man whose life plan was to count blades of grass in park squares or well-trimmed lawns. Everything in its power included guaranteeing not only the sort of material goods enumerated in FDR's Second Bill of Rights, such as an adequate diet, decent housing, and good medical care. The government must also right self-esteem. The grass counter cannot pursue his life plan while doubting its worth or his own. Rawls takes for granted that humans are too psychologically frail to maintain their self-esteem when faced with harsh criticism. Fairness, then, requires protection against not only sticks and stones, but against names, dirty looks, inappropriate laughter, white privilege, and mansplaining that could generate a feeling of inferiority as to their status in the community that may affect people's hearts and minds in a way unlikely ever to be undone. Whether liberalism gets where it wants to go will depend on whether, assuming we remain a democracy, a majority favors or opposes that destination. To quote Cropsey one last time, liberalism's commitment to the cultivation and expression of all idiosyncratic differences could not tolerate differences of an invidious character over either clashing worldviews or unreconciled interests. As a result, whether a liberal society would be in fact a free society is a grave question unknown to liberalism. Whether liberals take America where they want it to go will depend, to a significant degree, on whether Americans do or do not come to feel that freedom is more trouble than it's worth. If rights are still worth respecting at home and vital interests still worth defending abroad, then America will remain free and liberals will remain contemptuous of it. And if not, then we will experience the burdens and benefits, such as they are, of transforming our republic into the United States of feeling good about ourselves. Thank you.
Kevin.
You know, I was going to say I hadn't seen this many people sitting taking notes since I used to teach, but the truth is I never saw this many people sitting taking notes when I was teaching either. So where's the left going? I hate to be one of these like pedantic talk radio guys, but I really hate the term liberalism because it's just worn out and it's not who they are, which is something I'll get to here in a second. So the left is intellectually dead, and where it's heading toward is authoritarianism. And I will speak to the latter point first. So I live in New York, and I've just returned from the People's March for the climate. And as you know from history, anytime something has the people's appended in front of it, genocide's just around the corner. And I watched Robert F. Kennedy, who may be a witless dilettante, but he is the possessor of one of the most famous names in American politics, stand in front of a ravening, hate-filled, angry crowd of 100,000 people or more, some people claim 300,000 people, screaming in rage, calling for people who hold your views, or what I assume are many of your views, on things like climate change to be imprisoned. Not to be debated, not to be criticized, to be locked up on criminal charges and imprisoned. He is not the first person to make this case. I'm sure some of you are familiar with Gawker. I don't know why you would be familiar with Gawker if you didn't have to be, but some of you are. A guy named Adam Weinstein, one of their political writers, wrote an essay a couple years ago making this very same case, that people who are holders of unorthodox or unapproved opinions on the issue of global warming should be put into prisons. Again, I can't emphasize that this is not me exaggerating their position. His headline was, "Jail Climate Change Deniers." Or, I'm sorry, arrest climate change deniers. It's a remarkable thing. But what's even more remarkable is just down the street from here, in a near, or I believe it was a unanimous vote among Senate Democrats last week, voted to repeal the First Amendment of the Constitution. They didn't put it that way, but their campaign finance amendment, as they're calling it, is a repeal of the First Amendment. Anytime there is an expenditure of resources intended to influence political outcomes, you're subject to censorship, federal regulation. That could be anything from a newspaper endorsement to a book to a television show. It's always framed as being about evil, wicked corporations and using their money to influence elections, like that's a bad thing. But the way this particular law is written, it's a very simple law. It's 3 sentences, something like that. Any expenditure of resources in the cause of trying to change a political outcome is regulatable. This represents a full repeal of the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. And it was done specifically because the Supreme Court has twice in the last couple of years said, no, you can't regulate X, Y, and Z. You can't ban people from showing a movie that's critical of Hillary Clinton, which is what the Citizens United case was about. because we do have this thing called the First Amendment. And so now they're saying, well, we're not going to have that anymore. But we're going to pretend like we're not saying that. Now, any decent, self-respecting society, these people would have been literally tarred and feathered and run out of town on a rail, but we sort of put up with it because we're basically nice, and we've gotten used to it. But at some point, we're going to have to really face, in a very difficult way, the fact that we're dealing with an increasingly naked, aggressive, authoritarian movement. And it's become that for the other set of things that I wanted to talk about, because it's not only out of ideas, it's been out of ideas for a long, long time. The American left, the Anglo-American left, and especially the European left, for a generation, their big idea was Marxism. Not everyone was a self-professed Marxist, but it was their essential intellectual foundation. It was their way of understanding the world, sort of capital H, Hegelian history, the idea of economic determinism, all the rest of it, and the manageability of markets and society through political institutions. That was their basic thing. Then, of course, Berlin Wall comes down. It's finally once and all revealed for the murderous, genocidal, and not totally irrelevant to the conversation, ecologically disastrous movement that it was. Try explaining to the people on the left, by the way, what the Soviets did to their environment. That the Aral Sea disaster, the worst economic or the worst environmental catastrophe probably in modern history, was not an accident. It was a matter of public policy. It's still a radioactive, toxic desert. It's funny, you see pictures of it. There's ships out there in the middle of the desert because it used to be a sea. Try getting them to understand this is just impossible. So Marxism could no longer be their basic idea. It could no longer be, we have Marxist and Marxist light, and that's essentially what the left does. But there are two basic fundamental assumptions about the way the world works, which far precede Marx and all the rest of it, have also really come up against reality in a way that's increasingly hard for them to deny. And those assumptions are the malleability of human character and the manageability of complex institutions. The left has always taken, at least since the time of Rousseau, a kind of basically blank slate view of what human beings are, that they can be shaped in any way, given the right sort of education, given the right sort of institutions. You can make the sort of people you want. In the Soviet Union, it was new Soviet man. But this has been part of the left's thinking, its cultural assumptions, basically across the board forever. That's part of the progressive project, is that people are basically shapeable. This is no longer really a dispute that's a matter of opinion, it's a matter of fact. We know enough from biology at this point about how human behavior has evolved, about its biological origins, from evolutionary psychology, from genetic psychiatrics and genetic psychology, rather, and a number of related fields, that the idea that humans are just basically shapeable and mutable is simply not true. This is no longer a matter of philosophical dispute, it's a matter of biology. And any halfway literate person who follows the sciences in this area knows that. This isn't to say that we have to take a view of biological determinism of human behavior, but yeah, human behavior is as much a part of our evolutionary heritage as our bodies are. Culture is not outside of biology, and if culture is not outside of biology, you just can't change it. If you do change it, it takes, sort of 100,000-year intervals, which is not really how politics works. The second, 2 years right around here. The second assumption the left has always had is the idea of the manageability of complex systems, specifically economic organizations. That you can have the government or some great bureaucracy, as long as it's staffed with the right people, as long as they're really smart and they really care, and as long as we have the right people in there, then we can do things like achieve better outcomes than markets do for our 5-year wheat plan, or our new Soviet steel factory, or whatever we're doing, or the American public schools, which are organized on a pure communist lines. I mean, the means of production are actually owned by the state, and they work about as well as you expect. So this is something that, as I'm sure you all know, that Mises was really the first one to attack in a really organized way with the socialist calculation problem, in which he argued that outside of the existence of market prices, you don't have enough information to ever make rational economic decisions, which is why central planning doesn't work. And this was, basically a matter of theoretical economics for a long, long time, and he made a pretty good case for it, but it wasn't something that was dispositive. But over the last 30, 40 years, there's been the emergence of what's broadly known as complexity science, the study of complex adaptive systems, work being done at places like the Santa Fe Institute, people like Melanie Mitchell. And this, too, has become a much more general and applicable principle than Mises had really ever thought, far outside of the world of economics. So you've got very, very simple economic systems like, the cotton futures market or something like that, that are not only so complex that they can't be comprehended or understood and therefore managed or planned, but they're not really even understandable in principle, no matter how smart the people are you put on the committee, no matter how good their incentives are, what resources you give them. And this is really, scientifically speaking, the final nail in the whole idea of central planning, period. It's going to have to change fundamentally the way we think about things like regulation, particularly things like financial regulation, which is really very difficult to do. It's difficult to do in a way that doesn't produce unexpected outcomes. I mean, no one really planned to have a housing crisis in 2008 and 2009, but it was a direct result of regulatory actions that led to it, fairly obviously in retrospect, but not so obviously prospectively. And as the left loses this debate, as these scientific ideas become more generally known in society and limit what we actually expect government to be able to do in terms of shaping individuals and institutions both, all that's really left is a power struggle. And I think we've really almost arrived at that point. I mean, I read all the lefty writers. I live in New York, so all my friends are liberals. All my friends are leftists, I guess I should say, except Roger Kimball. He's like my only conservative friend in the world. I can't remember when the last time it was I heard a new idea from one. I mean, they're really, really, truly out of ideas. They're intellectually bankrupt. You've got, Jesse Meyerson writing over at Rolling Stone, 20 pages behind the Justin Bieber profile, about making the case of a renaissance of communism. So they're reaching all the way back to there. I love the idea, by the way, of a magazine about rock and roll. I mean, the most frivolous consumer product in the history of frivolous consumer products, making the case for communism. That's awesome. Of course, the kid grew up in Manhattan. Where else? So, I mean, we're really looking at, I think, eventually the gloves just coming off, the pretense of this being about ideas going out the window, and we're talking just about a pure power struggle, which is why so much of the left right now, both in terms of its rhetoric and its political organizing technique, is withdrawing into sort of naked tribalism. Interest group politics, whether it's, sexual orientation politics, war on women stuff, the usual religious and ethnic minority politics. This is what we're going to be dealing with for the next 20 years, and we're going to be dealing with it in the context of people who really think that it's okay to put you in jail for not agreeing with them, or for running advertisements without the government's permission, or for showing a movie in a way that Harry Reid doesn't think is acceptable. And if you try to tell me, and I'm not really all that old, although I'm older than all the front row here, I think, if you tried to tell me 20 years ago that we were going to be in that place, that we would actually be having a first-order priorities conversation about whether freedom of speech and thought and of the press is acceptable in the United States in the 21st century, I would have thought you were crazy. I would have thought that you were absolutely out of your mind. But we are at that point right now, and we are sort of having that debate, and we're having that fight, and it's going to be probably something close to a literal fight at some point. That's where we're going. I don't think it's a very good or healthy place, because I like the idea that we can actually shape the world and public policy and government through discussion and exchange of views and trying to have a rational discourse about principles and priorities and those sorts of things, but I really don't think that we can. And it's a sad thing for me, because I'm a writer, and that's kind of what I try to do for a living, and I'm sort of coming around to the view that it's not probably going to be all that useful, except maybe in terms of explaining things to people who are already inclined to try to understand them in a way that's something beyond black hats and white hats. Just a fairly small minority of readers, I guess, but maybe enough to keep National Review in business, so I hope so. That's the bad news, and that's usually what I'm brought here for, so you're welcome.
So we will we'll have questions from you all, and so we'll have some folks with microphones coming up. But I will take the moderator's prerogative and offer the first question. I certainly agree with the frame, Kevin, that you make of the exhaustion of the left, and I think that the culture war now, culture war tomorrow, culture war forever sort of approach that they are using is indicative of that exhaustion, because that's what you have to use to motivate your base and your coalition. The concern that I guess I have is, it seems to me that that while that is indicative of the tribalism of the left, there's a bigger danger, which is that there is not so much of a unified opposition to the left when it comes to the aspects of authoritarianism that you're discussing. And I would put this to all of you, but I'd particularly put it to you, Kevin. Isn't one of the biggest dangers that we have here that it has for decades been in the interest of the Congress itself, of members of Congress, and essentially politicians in general, to cede power away to supposedly neutral institutions full of arbiters of what's good for society, the top men who can handle these decisions, and then to basically defend the interests of the people in their districts or the people they're supposed to represent against those institutions, and say, well, I'm sorry that this agency did this horrible thing to you, but I'm going to write a really nasty letter about it. And to that end, isn't it really indicative that if the left is going to be successful in this effort, that itself requires the right to not see the danger of authoritarianism, even toward their own ends, even in pursuit of maybe their own vision of what society should look like?
Well, sure, yeah. I mean, the usual public choice critique applies, and just because someone has an R next to his name doesn't mean that he's immune to the temptations of power. I mean, we still have an export-import bank. We still have a Department of Commerce and a Small Business Administration that exist to do nothing except bribe small-town politicians. So, yeah, that's gonna be a problem. When I see a Republican elected, I'm happy because it wasn't a Democrat, because the Democratic Party is something that really more closely, I think, resembles a crime syndicate than a political party. But other than that, I don't really have that much hope for the Republicans. In terms of them really internalizing the intellectual contours of this critique and what I've been talking about, most of these guys don't understand their own farm bill. And trying to get them to understand something that's two orders of abstraction removed from the day-to-day business of raising money for campaigns and trying to pass a bill with your name on it, I think is probably a fool's errand. And so it's not something I would invest a lot of energy in.
Bill or David?
No, I think we can move ahead.
In that case, up here, can you wait for the microphone?
Hi, I'm Susie Kim from MSNBC. I had two questions, actually, mostly for Mr. Azerrad. The first one was, you mentioned in terms of the licentiousness that you point out in terms of sex and drugs and entertainment, technology, that sort of thing. What sort of struck me about that is that these also seem to be values that the libertarian faction of the conservative movement also share, and that there's actually been a quite deal of overlap, and then that in terms of factionalism, this is actually pointed to a rift on the conservative side, and it doesn't sort of only represent a liberal view. I was wondering if you could address that. And secondly, you mentioned that it wouldn't necessarily take a war or an economic meltdown for people to kind of wake up to reality, when in fact we have and continue to experience both of those things in recent memory. Do you think that those weren't enough of a catalyst for the kind of cultural and political changes that you're looking for, or are we still sort of waiting to experience those changes?
Two very good questions. The first one, I didn't mention it because I didn't want Ben to bite me or to punch me.
Or Kevin either.
But no, I agree with you. So in that sense, the libertarian policy priorities are not helping the cause when it comes to these issues. As to the second question, I just want to be quite clear that I'm not advocating for any form of a wag the dog scenario that conservatives have an interest in making life more dangerous to weaken the prospects of liberalism. But we haven't had war at home. We had a visually spectacular attack on September 11th, but things went back to normal very rapidly. And we had a, yeah, I mean, 2008 was ugly, but I mean, look at the quality of life in this country. I mean, it's still pretty extraordinary. So my only point is that a lot of the left's agenda, I think, on some of these issues is rather frivolous from a serious political point of view, and we're capable of indulging in it, of entertaining these discussions because the foundations are not rocked. The peace and the prosperity is largely in place. And if that people really felt that either were threatened, I think they would lose interest in large segments of the left's agenda. I think the appeal of the promise of economic security would still be appealing, even if, especially in times of an economic downturn.
I mean, to amplify that a bit, I think the period when modern liberalism was in sort of a political eclipse from 1968 through 1988, the Republican nominee won 5 of the 6 presidential elections. The Republican, if you add up all the popular votes in those 6 elections, the Republicans got almost 53% compared to the Democrats' 43%. This was a time when people doubted the liberal paradigm's sort of utility for doing basic government things, like keeping the streets safe. It's extraordinary, for example, that New York City, of all places, went 20 years without a Democratic mayor from 1993 to 2013, again, precisely because the effect of people doubting basic liberal competence was so strong that even New York was willing to make that. Once you had 20 years under Giuliani and Bloomberg where the garbage was picked up, where the bills were paid, where the streets were safe, New York felt safe to go back to somebody like de Blasio. That's what I was thinking when I was hearing David make that argument.
Did you want to?
Well, yeah, I would just say on the question of the alleged rift between libertarian views on some of these issues and those of more traditional conservatives, I think it's often overstated. I mean, there's a world of difference between the question of whether you think that marijuana should be prohibited versus whether you think marijuana is good. And which obviously it is, and if you know any potheads, the most boring people in the world. I think the same thing goes with things like sexual license. I think we all see around us the evidence that the disorder that's been introduced into family structure since the 1960s and then really accelerated in the 70s is a bad thing. It's an objectively, measurably bad thing. It correlates very strongly with lots of bad life outcomes for children and women particularly. But the question of whether you'd want to try to regulate that the way we regulate things like drug consumption is, you end up getting some questions of values there and questions of prudence there, both. But I don't really think you have too many people on either side seriously saying, well, we're going to repeal no-fault divorce laws or have laws that disadvantage women for having illegitimate children and those sorts of things. So it's possible to have both views at the same time, that the social outcomes are bad, but they're still not necessarily things you want to regulate or prohibit.
While there's certainly rifts, I would just suggest that where constitutional conservatives and libertarians are united is in a belief in self-interest well understood in the sort of Tocquevillian concept of it. And I also think that, to Kevin's point, there's a greater understanding among libertarians today that the breakdown of the family has been a bad thing, that it's been led to more encroachments from government, and that the greatest hedge against government expansion is actually strong families and communities. Next question's up here.
Thank you. Paul Marengoff from Powerline. I'd like to ask David, you suggested that the struggle is between liberalism and conservatism is contingent in part on what conservatives do. And I just wonder if you could amplify that, maybe discuss the 2, 3, or 4 most important things that the conservative movement needs to do if it's going to be viable in countering the tendencies that many of us deplore.
Yeah, I mean, that's a broad question. I think 2 things that we're already seeing. One is a better rhetorical strategy, that conservatives, I think, are too comfortable appealing to abstractions, like the constitutional legitimacy of a particular bill, the size of government, numbers in the trillions. I mean, these things don't resonate with people. And it's a form of laziness to assume that people will be happy with a particular proposal because it's more aligned with the Constitution. I mean, it appeals to a certain audience, but as I said flippantly in my remarks, I think most Americans don't give a hoot about the 10th Amendment. So one would be a better rhetorical agenda, and I think you see this. I think you see this at the Heritage Foundation, you see this at AEI, you see this, I think Yuval Levin at EPPC is doing wonderful work. There's an awareness that we need to find a more compelling way to talk about what it is we're selling. And then you need a real backbone. I mean, you need a robust policy agenda that comes in and shows, well, how are we going to deliver? And here, too, I see a lot of work being done in the movement at the Heritage Foundation and elsewhere. It's starting to trickle up into Congress. I think Mike Lee has been introducing some interesting bills. But I think the movement is farther ahead than the party on this one. So, I mean, the two that come to my mind are, I mean, because the left on rhetoric is wonderful. I mean, we've been laying out their failures one after the other, but my God, do they talk a good game. And I think there's room for considerable improvement on the right on that, and I'm seeing some of it, and I think that's encouraging.
Do you want to pass it up to him? No.
Well, I just wanted to follow up on the violence issue and the wartime, and you're talking about how it might serve as a wake-up call, but some of the biggest progressive advances have come in times of war. Teddy Roosevelt starting at Woodrow Wilson in World War I, and what happened in the courts in the 40s was just still laying framework for progressives today, and that was all because the sense of security that the government was providing had people turn a blind eye to what they were doing at home. So I guess just kind of reconcile that. Is it necessarily a good thing that crime or whatever would go up? Not that it goes up, but would it kind of serve to wake people up, or does it serve to kind of turn them even more blind?
Well, there's two ways to answer it. One is to repeat what Bill said, which is you need to distinguish the threat of a foreign enemy from a rise of violent crime at home. And if they start going soft on crime because they think the issue has gone away, I don't think that leads to an expansion of the state or it helps the liberal cause. In terms of the war examples you give, I didn't say that a sense of danger will kill off the left. I said that it would render frivolous and irrelevant large swaths of the modern liberal agenda. Woodrow Wilson and FDR were not fighting for gender-neutral bathrooms. So it can be used as a pretext to grow the state.
Yet.
But I think I think the left changed in the 60s. There's, FDR won World War II. I know I have a fellow Claremonster on the panel, and we're not supposed to speak well of FDR, but, could Obama win a war today? I mean, the left has changed considerably. So you're pointing to examples of the old left that still had some sense of the exigencies of foreign policy that I think the left today has started to lose.
Is there one over there?
Continuing on with the question of violence, you all seem to agree that there seems to be a weakness in modern liberalism towards being able to handle violence. And my question is that partly to do with the lack of manliness? And if so, what has caused this loss of manliness?
This is becoming a Carl Schmitt panel.
Actually, could I?
Yeah, please.
The one thing we maybe disagree about is I would dispute very hotly the notion that the left isn't good at violence. The left loves violence. It wants to use violence to organize every aspect of life. In the state of California, it's a crime to offer, so-called gay conversion therapy to somebody who wants it. Now, I happen to think this stuff is hokum and pseudoscience, but we actually allow people to try to physically change people's sex through surgery and genital amputation. But if you offer someone counseling that they're asking for, even if it's bad counseling in California, this is a crime, to which they will dispatch to your house a man with a gun to put you in jail to stop you from doing it. So the idea that they're not good at violence is, I think, defective. What they're not good at is foreign policy, because they don't believe in the legitimacy of American institutions, starting with the military.
Several over here.
I'm Andrew Evans with National Affairs. I want to follow up on a comment you made, David, about the trajectory up to this point of the left. A lot of the sort of largest public institutions that we have now are a result of the policy and political victories of the left. So we have the big social transformations during the Great Depression put in by FDR, the minimum wage. Then we have Lyndon Johnson and the Great Society, which created Medicare. These are huge, huge institutions. My question is the left today of a piece with the left that created those institutions? Or has there been a fundamental shift such that that we shouldn't expect those kinds of policy victories again in the future?
No, I don't think they've abandoned the agenda of social justice and managing the economy to avoid the ups and downs. I think they've added other components and recalibrated some. So the core project of putting your faith in centralized administration to resolve all of life's ills, I mean, that remains a core unshakable premise. I think they've gone soft on foreign policy in a way that they weren't beforehand. And they've added on a whole slew of so-called social issues that, the early left was quite square on. I mean, Wilson and FDR and Teddy Roosevelt were good when it came to the family. And as a result, that's creating tensions with religious liberty, which, as I said, I mean, really, you look at the 20th century, this is not something they went after. So they've kept that one component. They've gone weak on foreign policy, and then they've added other issues.
It is interesting to think that the only thing that Hillary Clinton is having to moderate about her past is statements on the family and religious liberty and pop lyrics and things like that. So I think we're about out of time, so we'll take one more question.
In talking about Eric Rosenman from the Washington Office of CAMRA, the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America, if we could find a longer acronym, we would take it. In talking about the wonderful ability of the left's rhetoric to overpower conservative arguments about the left's policy failures, I think I'd like to hear how that rhetoric can be pierced, especially when its fundamental terms, liberal and progressive, are good. They sound great. And conservative and traditional, especially in a society like ours, sound reactionary, when from what all you have said, the reaction is on the, quote, liberal progressive side.
I'd love to hear all of your reactions to that, particularly given that, if anything, this was not a name that conservatives chose for themselves, but was chosen for them.
I think it's remarkable in a country whose traditions are liberty, democracy, prosperity, and domestic peace. The word traditional sounds bad. Traditional sounds bad in a lot of places. Afghanistan, traditional doesn't sound so good there. It should sound pretty good here. That's the great irony of where we are, though, is that, I've argued and believed that there really is no intellectual confrontation. It's over, we won. What we're talking about right now is not philosophy or economics, it's public relations and advertising. Now, there are people out there who are good at coming up with better ways to talk to people and to assuage people's concerns that Republicans are all, mean, nasty Wall Street guys who also happen to be theocratic Christian Taliban people who want to live in backwoods and join militias when they're not running companies on Wall Street.
Living the dream.
Living the dream. Well, and I try to explain it's just me, it's not everybody. But, that's really a question of political tactics. And, Republicans do not inspire a whole lot of hope in that. Sometimes they have some pretty good years, but because they come from different sorts of backgrounds, typically, than Democrats do, they tend to be a lot of business guys, those sorts of things. They're not used to speaking to people in a way that reframes things in terms of their own self-interest, and that assuages their particular fears about certain aspects of the conservative vision. And I don't want to go on too long about this, but one of the things Republicans really don't appreciate and that they really need to get themselves fixed up on is, the sort of Santa Claus view of the welfare state, that people vote for Democrats because Democrats give them stuff, and that they're basically selfish and greedy and lazy, and that's why they do it. And I think they're fundamentally wrong about that. The Democrats' appeal and the sort of progressive appeal in general isn't about self-interest in that sort of narrow materialistic sense. It's about risk aversion. If you look at groups of people who are traditional Democratic voters, traditional left voters, women, especially unmarried women, racial, religious, ethnic minorities, they all tend to be groups who are very notably, documentally risk-averse people. And this makes sense when you think about it. I mean, I believe in capitalism. I believe in the joys of free markets. But really try to explain that to a 50-year-old African-American who has within living memory the knowledge of being formally excluded from those markets and from being an economic operator. The same thing goes with women. The idea that entrepreneurship and business and these sorts of things are what's going to drive society forward are true, and we should continue to emphasize them. But we can't necessarily blame people for having some doubt about it when, in fact, for historical reasons, they do have some pretty good reason to have doubt about it.
Bill?
Well, I think George Will is right, that there's the basic distinction. Conservatism is true and liberalism makes you feel good. So there's no really solid answer to the question you pose of how to turn that around, because I think inherent in the situation is that conservatism as an enterprise, as a standpoint, is in a Sisyphean situation. It is not the smaller project of protecting America from liberalism is part of the larger project, a permanent one, of protecting democracy from itself. And as Tocqueville made clear, democracy contains within itself some self-destructive tendencies. So people, the problem is people very often would rather feel good than see things as they are and live in a world as it is. Where conservatism finds targets of opportunity, as David and Kevin have suggested, is when the effort to make people feel good involves denying certain fundamental realities, and this happens reliably. Certainly one thing that happens a lot is a chronic problem is that liberals in America are not straight with the voters about how much their programs are going to cost, and are always keen to leave people with the impression that we can have a Scandinavian welfare state without anything approaching Scandinavian taxes. And therefore, there are these chronic overruns, there are these out-year seas of red ink, and there Democratic candidates all the time pledging that we can somehow deal with this by confining tax increases to the top 1 or 2 or 3% of the income distribution. No reputable person believes this is possible. Either we have to tax more heavily, many more people, or we have to curtail our expenditures. But because it makes people feel good to think you can have a big welfare state and small taxes, that is the view that is promoted over and over and over again. It's when the reality, the unreality of that viewpoint comes into view that conservatives have an opportunity to go to the people and say, here's the way things are, let's deal with the situation rather than deal with the fantasy.
Thank you so much for coming here today. I'd like to thank the Heritage Foundation for hosting us, and please let our panelists hear your gratitude.